Hi, welcome back to Lades After Dark. I'm your host, Orion.
And I'm your host, Ducky.
Tonight we're delving into one of the most captivating unsolved mysteries in American history, the case of D.B. Cooper. Before we begin, I want to paint a picture for our listeners. Imagine this. It's November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. The Vietnam War is still raging. All in the Family is the most popular show on television, and a gallon of gas costs just 40 cents, which is wild compared to prices nowadays. At Portland International Airport, a man walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He's wearing a business suit, black or dark brown, depending on witness accounts, with a crisp white shirt, narrow black tie, and a mother of pearl tie pin. He's described as being in his mid 40s, around 5'10" to 6 foot tall, and weighing about 170 to 180 pounds. He's wearing dark sunglasses, which no one thinks much of at the time.
Which that's a pretty perfect disguise because he's blending in, looking like he's going on a business trip. However, it was also distinct enough to be memorable and go down in the history books.
Exactly. This man purchases a one-way ticket to Seattle for $20 cash, which I wish we could still get plane tickets for 20.
I wish I just spent 1,700 on mine.
He purchases this ticket using the name Dan Cooper. Now, I should mention, the DB Cooper name we all came to know was from a media mix-up. A reporter somehow misheard Dan as DB, and the name stuck in the public consciousness. The flight, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, is a Boeing 727 100. Registration number, excuse me, November 467 Uniform Sierra. It's a short 30-minute flight to Seattle, scheduled to depart at 2:50 p.m. Cooper boards the plane, takes a seat in 18C, which is the last row of the coach section on the right side. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper gets comfortable. He orders a bourbon and a soda, a bourbon and seven to be specific, paying in cash, and he leaves a tip. He lights up a Raleigh cigarette, and to anyone watching, he just looks like another businessman heading home for the holiday season. But then, around 3 p.m., he hands flight attendant Florence Schaffner a note. Florence is used to getting phone numbers from businessmen, so she tucks the note into her pocket without reading it.
That's such a big mistake, especially nowadays. You cannot just take notes from people. You don't know what's
Oh,
in that shit.
oh, absolutely. I couldn't even imagine trying to accept a note from some random person on a flight nowadays.
Go crazy.
So after Florence tucks this note into her pocket, Cooper leans into her and he says very quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Creepy. The note, which Florence would later recall was written in neat, all capital letters with a felt tip pen, read, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit beside me. You are being hijacked." When Florence sits down, Cooper opens his briefcase just enough for her to peek inside. She later describes seeing 8 red cylinders attached to wires and a large battery. He then calmly outlines his demands: $200,000 in cash, specifically in unmarked $20 bills, and 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes. The demands are relayed to the cockpit and then to Seattle Tacoma Airport authorities. The airline's president, Donald Nyrop, authorizes payment of the ransom, determined to follow the company's protocol. He was quoted as saying, "Give the hijacker what he wants, don't antagonize him, let him think he's in control."
And the whole time, the other passengers had no idea what was happening. Like that's such a wild concept to me. Because now, if this happened nowadays, it'd be all over TikTok before the plane even landed.
Oh, I absolutely 100% agree. They had no idea whatsoever what was going on around them as this was going on. And considering the time frame where people didn't really interject in each other's lives, especially at the holiday season, I'm not surprised. Most of the passengers thought there were mechanical issues when the plane circled Puget Sound for 2 hours while authorities gathered the ransom money. During that time, Cooper remained remarkably calm. He made small talk with the flight attendants, mentioned that he thought the airline's financial problems were not his concern, and even offered to request meals for the flight crew during the delay. The money was gathered from Seattle area banks. 10,000 in $20 bills. 10,000 $20 bills, excuse me. Here's an interesting detail though. The FBI managed to photograph all the serial numbers of these bills, which began with the code L for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. The parachutes came from a local skydiving school and McCord Air Force Base. Cooper specifically requested civilian parachutes with manual ripcords. When the plane landed in Seattle, he allowed all the passengers to leave, but kept essential flight crew. Pilot William Scott, First Officer William Radajak, Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson, and Flight Attendant Tina Mucklow. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Cooper's instructions for the next leg of the flight were remarkably specific. He wanted the plane to fly to Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling, specifically 100 knots, at a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. He demanded the landing gear remain extended and the wing flaps be lowered 15 degrees and the cabin remain unpressurized.
He definitely knew his aircraft, and it seems like he knew his parachutes as well, because requesting specifically civilian parachutes is extremely important for the rest of the story.
Oh, absolutely. The level of technical knowledge he displayed was absolutely remarkable. He even knew that the 727 wasn't the only commercial aircraft with an aft staircase that could be opened in flight, a feature that would become crucial to his escape. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, likely over southwestern Washington state, near the Lewis River, Cooper lowered the aft stairs. The crew noticed a change in cabin air pressure at 8:13 p.m. And that's when DB Cooper, with $200,000 strapped to his body and a parachute on his back, stepped out into the dark, stormy night. The conditions were brutal: pitch black, temperatures around -7 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude, winds at about 200 miles per hour, wearing only a business suit and loafers. He jumped into a heavily wooded area in the middle of a rainstorm with no specialized gear and no clear indication of where he would land.
That sounds extremely unpleasant. I hate the cold as it is, but then throw me out of a plane at that height with that cold of temperatures must have sucked. And the interesting part is nobody ever found him.
Oh, absolutely. The FBI conducted one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. They investigated over 800 suspects, followed thousands of leads, and even created maps showing where Cooper might have landed based on wind conditions and flight path. But they found nothing. No body, no parachute, no briefcase, no clothes. The only concrete evidence ever discovered came 9 years later in February of 1980. 8-year-old Brian Ingram was digging in the sand at Tenabar along the Columbia River when he uncovered 3 packets of weathered $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. $5,800 of Cooper's loot had finally surfaced. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. The money was found 20 miles downstream from Cooper's suspected landing zone in an area that hydraulics experts say it couldn't have naturally reached. The bills were decomposed in a way that suggested they hadn't moved much once they reached the spot, but how they got there remains unexplained.
So now we ask the two really big questions of this entire case. What happened to him, and did he survive?
Those are the $1 million questions, aren't they? The FBI maintained for years that Cooper probably didn't survive the jump, which seems unlikely if his money was found so far away from his landing area. They point to several factors: the harsh conditions of the weather, the fact that it was dark outside, his inappropriate clothing, which, hello, business suit jumping out of an airplane, and the challenging terrain. Some agents believed he was an amateur who got lucky with the hijacking, but died somewhere in the aftermath. But others argue differently. Cooper's knowledge of aircraft, his specific demands about flight conditions, his comfort with parachuting terminology, they all suggest someone with military or aviation experience. Some theorize he might have been a Boeing employee or an Air Force veteran.
I've always thought that was pretty interesting. Right before Thanksgiving, when security would be more focused on people going home for the holidays. And the theory of him being an Air Force veteran or a employee is actually really interesting to me because he specifically requested parachutes. He specifically requested civilian parachutes. However, the parachutes that he was given weren't actually technically steerable. So he jumps out, he pulls it, and that's it. You're falling to the ground. Yes, you can go a little bit in each direction, but they're not actually steerable.
That's a great point. His timing does suggest careful planning. He chose a really short flight, late in the day, conditions that would make pursuit difficult. He knew enough about the aircraft to specify exact flight conditions that would make his jump survivable, even if extremely dangerous. And he definitely seemed like he had a wealth of knowledge that your typical civilian wouldn't have had. So let's talk about some of the most compelling theories about what happened after that jump.
The Richard McCoy theory is a really interesting one. Do you want to take the lead on that one?
Oh, absolutely. Richard McCoy, a Vietnam veteran who conducted a very similar hijacking just 4 months after Cooper's heist. He hijacked a United Airlines flight from Denver to Los Angeles in April of 1972, demanded $500,000, and parachuted out over Utah. But here's the kicker, he was caught just 2 days later.
But didn't he also escape from prison?
Oh, absolutely, he sure did. In 1974, and he was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. Some investigators, including former FBI agent Russell Calamay, believed McCoy was Cooper. He had the right skill set. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, an experienced skydiver, and had knowledge of aircraft. But there are problems with this theory. McCoy was only 29 in 1971, much younger than the eyewitness descriptions of D.B. Cooper himself, and his wife provided an alibi for the day of Cooper's hijacking, which honestly, if your wife's providing you an alibi, it's probably pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, that does make a lot of sense. But another theory that has always kind of caught my eye is the Kenneth Christensen one. That one seems pretty compelling as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Kenneth Christensen is one of the most interesting suspects. He was a former paratrooper who worked as a purser for Northwest Orient Airlines, the very airline Cooper hijacked. He bought a house shortly after the hijacking, despite having a modest salary, and reportedly made a deathbed confession to his brother in 1994, and he even looked similar to the Cooper sketch.
I mean, they made a whole documentary on him, didn't they?
They did, and it brought up some fascinating points. Christensen knew the airline's procedures, had parachuting experience from his military service, and was familiar with
Hmm.
the Seattle area. He was, however, shorter and lighter than Cooper's reported height and weight, and some investigators argue he lacked the assertive personality described by the flight crew. Let me tell you about another compelling suspect, William J. Smith, a retired World War II paratrooper. His own
Okay.
family turned him into the FBI after his death in 2018. They found old photos showing him looking remarkably like the Cooper sketch, and he had both a technical knowledge and physical description that matched Cooper.
I mean, there are some pretty wild theories out there. Like one really just outlandish one where Bigfoot helped him escape. I don't know
Oh
what
my
that's
gosh.
about.
The Cooper case has definitely attracted some colorful theories over the years, but there are some seriously interesting ones that sound wild at first, but then they make you think. For instance, some researchers believe that Cooper might have had an accomplice with a boat waiting in the Columbia River, which could explain how the money ended up at Tenebar.
That would explain that. But there's also a theory that he was a woman.
Yes. So Barbara Dayton, a recreational pilot and a World War II veteran who later underwent gender reassignment surgery, not that that's really that important, claimed to be Cooper. She said she conducted the hijacking disguised as a man. She knew the area well and had both piloting and parachuting experience. However, the FBI dismissed this theory based on height discrepancy and lack of evidence. Hmm. Here's another fascinating theory. Some investigators believe Cooper might have been a Boeing employee who lost his job during the major layoffs in 1971. That would explain his technical knowledge about the 727, his familiarity with Seattle, and potentially his motivations as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty solid theory. Another one that I've heard a lot about and I actually really like is that he was working for some CIA or other government agency as some kind of like test for airline security. This is before airline security got as stupid as it is today.
Like before we had air marshals flying in the sky with every single flight. That theory actually makes some interesting points. Cooper's apparent technical knowledge, his calm demeanor, the precise nature of his demands, that could all suggest military or intelligence training. Some argue the hijacking exposed significant security flaws that led to major changes in airline procedures. The aftermath of the Cooper hijacking transformed aviation security. It led to the installation of Cooper vanes, those small pegs that you might have noticed on the backs of commercial airplanes that prevent the rear stairs from being lowered in flight. It also contributed to the implementation of mandatory screening of passengers and luggage.
So in a way, he changed aviation, specifically aviation security, forever because he kind of pushed airlines to start their security, like up their security, years before we invented or developed the TSA.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what's really interesting is that the case still remains open at the FBI, although they officially suspended active investigation in 2016. The statute of limitations on the hijacking expired in 1976, but Cooper, or whoever he was, could still potentially be prosecuted for his crimes if he's caught.
Well, I mean, do you think they'll actually ever solve it? I mean, it's been what, that's 50 something years now.
Honestly, unless someone makes a legitimate deathbed confession with verifiable proof, or the remaining money somehow suddenly turns up with evidence attached, it's probably going to remain one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. And maybe that's part of why it continues to fascinate us. There's something compelling about a mystery that perfect that lies just beyond our grasp. And so, being as what it was, and there's so many theories out there, what is your personal feeling about the DB Cooper case? Do you think that the person who did it is still alive or could still potentially be prosecuted at any point?
So I don't think he should. Oh, okay, hold on. I don't think he still could be prosecuted. I mean, I'm sure they'll find a way to do it. Honestly, we have bigger things going on right now to worry about someone who hijacked a plane in the 70s. Um,
That's fair.
but when it comes to theories that I believe, I honestly believe that he was a paratrooper because just the knowledge and the not anybody can just kind of go, oh man, I'm gonna hijack a plane and jump out of the back of it. Like not everyone can do that, right? So, but if you have prior experience, prior training, um, you can make that jump pretty easily, especially with the parachutes that he was given at the time. And even though he requested, it seemed like he was more familiar with like the flights than he was with ever robbing anything. Like he asked for unmarked bills, but I mean they gave him money that was specifically marked. So he didn't really check it, he didn't really do anything. He just put the money on him and he jumped, right? Again, jumping in a business suit, especially in the 70s, I think not, but paratrooper makes the most sense to me because, it
I feel
just makes
like
sense.
at least something has to be said for all of the knowledge that he had. He had to have some type of connection to have those type of knowledge. So either he learned it in the military or he was part of intelligence or something had to be fit right into place for him to have gained all the knowledge that he did in order to be able to execute the hijacking the way that he did. Although I am a little bit concerned that he specifically asked for, unmarked bills and didn't even bother to check and see or find out anything about his bills before he jumped out of the aircraft. If he would have taken, 2 minutes to open one of the packets to look through his bills, and, he specifically asked that they be unmarked, he would have noticed that they were sequential bills and they all had an L on them.
Exactly. And I think, again, I think it's one of those things where his experience in one area, I think this might have just been like he probably planned it, yes, but I think mainly what it was just he planned this big, elaborate thing, and maybe he even jumped out the back not expecting to survive. He just did it to do it. So I don't know. There's a lot of interesting theories, but I think his knowledge of airplanes suggests a lot of background in some sort of aviation, or maybe he just did a lot of research before. I don't know. Um,
You
But
make a good point there. As far as like the research goes, a lot of the stuff regarding like the way things are built and patents and stuff like that, that's public information. You can access it, and it's been a long time since you've been able to access public information like that. He could have had friends or colleagues that had access to further information that he needed to pull together the information he wanted to have. You know, it just gets a little confusing because, he specifically said he wanted, you know, civilian. Why use the word civilian? But he specifically said he wanted civilian parachutes, even though he didn't end up
well,
getting civilian parachutes. But he specifically said he wanted civilian parachutes. Like, you have to have some type of, at least a little bit of military background to say, okay, I'm familiar with a military parachute. I don't want that.
yes, because military parachutes, you can't like steer them at all. You jump out and really you can't activate them yourselves. I mean, unless you're talking about Halo parachutes, which he was too low to even really use those. What you do is you hook them up to a line and then you jump out of a door and the parachute deploys behind you and you simply fall to the ground. So you can't control those. The landing is pretty garbage. Um, so it really does suggest some sort of military background because anybody who is going to parachute outside of the military in any way knows you don't want the parachute that's going to slam you off the ground, especially when he's in like a business suit. I think one of what his plan was to jump out, land, kind of ditch everything, take the money, and kind of just try to blend back in with society. If he used a military parachute, that wouldn't have happened.
Which that's actually a very interesting factoid that you bring up, because if he would have had a military chute and dropped and was leaving behind a military chute and he's in civilian gear, that would have easily been a very big red flag to anybody who could have potentially seen where he landed. And I get totally the wanting to be dressed in a business suit to try to like immediately blend back into society once he's landed. The problem being they're up at those altitudes. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is. It's freaking cold, man. Like, why would you put yourself at those altitudes not in proper gear? And you would figure, excuse me, you would figure that when he was doing his research or gathering his information, making his plan, etc., he would have realized, oh, hey, even though I'm flying at the lowest safe altitude without crashing this plane, it's going to be goddamn cold when I step out the back of that plane. So
Oh,
why wouldn't
yes.
he have at least gotten, a men's like overcoat or something like that to keep him warm? He could have ended up with hypothermia by the time he hit the ground.
So this is also brings up another interesting point. Um, whenever, so this is why I also might suggest military background, because whenever you jump out of a military style plane, you don't actually feel the heat difference, right? So it could be freezing, but you jump out, you don't really feel it until the parachute opens fully and you're already getting suspended to the ground. Um, Civilian parachutes, it's a lot different because you're getting more, you know, airtime. But when it comes to military parachutes, you jump out, you don't really feel anything until your parachute opens.
So that's interesting to think about, because why would you, in that case, you would want a military chute so you're not feeling the cold
At
until
that
your chute's all the
altitude,
way open.
military parachutes don't work. Military parachutes are really only good for about 3,600 feet at like the most because they have to inflate a certain way. If they don't inflate at a specific time, they're not going to inflate at all.
Okay, so he had this general idea of he didn't want a military based chute because he didn't want to plummet to his death because of how low he was.
Exactly. Um, those parachutes, they just need a certain amount of wind, and the air is just a lot thinner up at that altitude, so it will not inflate the proper way. So he'll end up actually just free falling to his death, which probably suggests is why he wanted them to bring two parachutes, Another interesting factoid about that is he got two parachutes and two reserve parachutes. A lot of people thought because he was going to end up escaping with a hostage, and he actually, one of the parachutes was a modern day for the time parachute that the civilians used, and the other parachute was a military parachute that wasn't steerable. One was and one wasn't, and he took the military non-steerable parachute with the older reserve, which is why the whole military theory came up because he chose a parachute that he was probably a little bit more familiar with because he might even have been instead of a paratrooper, a halo jumper, um, which back in the 70s just started to become like a thing.
So that could explain a lot why, even though he was given one of each kind of chute when he requested chutes, he chose to strap on the military chute.
Yes, it's also made to be able to jump with things, right? Obviously, military paratroopers are trying to jump in and have as as much stuff as they can with them. Um, so with a military parachute, he could have hooked it up to the front of him a lot easier than a civilian parachute.
Fair enough, because obviously, I mean, you look at civilian parachutes, you're looking at, falling out of the sky for fun. You're not looking at utility in that situation.
Exactly.
So thinking on it and trying to figure out, the theory that there was someone waiting for him on the river in a boat, it does make perfect sense. But then also you call into question, if there was somebody waiting for him with a boat, wouldn't they have had to have stopped further downriver for the money that the kid found to be left there? And it said that it was still all together and packaged, and it looked like it was weathered from a long time of being, in the ground or whatever. So it had to have been buried there for some specific reason, and it would have had to been purposeful. So why stop at that spot and then disappear and never come back for the money?
So it might be a thing where he buried the money thinking to come back for it, and then maybe he gets arrested in a few months, and then
Ah, like that one theory
he
that we
can't
just
come back for
discussed.
it. Exactly. So he
Fair
jumps out.
enough.
Okay. He's like, all right, well, obviously I can't be caught toting around $200,000 because they're going to be fucking looking for it. So I'm just going to bury some here. I'm going to come back for it. And he's a man. He's got a man brain, so he probably forgets about it. Out
Fair
of sight,
enough.
out of mind. We have object permanence. So boom, and then next thing you know, he's like, "Well, I'm out of money, so let me go rob another plane." It was easy enough the first time, and then
But why not
gets
just
caught.
go back for the money that he buried?
Object permanence. Men are weird like that. We forget shit.
So men are dumb.
If it's a little bit.
I guess that's fair. Hey, women have their dumb moments too. I get it.
Yeah, like out of sight, out of mind. We're like babies. It's just like, oh fuck, forgot about that.
It's like,
And
oh,
then
that makes
maybe he
perfect
did go
sense.
back
Like
for it.
babies, you wave something in front of a baby's face, and they're like, "Oh, give me the thing," and then you put it behind your back, and they're like, "Nah, where did it go?"
Or maybe he just forgot where he buried it. Like it didn't say there
That
was
is
any
another good
significant
theory.
markings.
That's another
It
good
was just
theory. It just was there. The kid just found it
exactly.
playing in the dirt.
Exactly. They found that. They found other bills, and it also might have been something where, I mean, according to the theory, it couldn't have naturally washed up there, but maybe it was something that fell out of the plane. Maybe if it didn't fall out of the plane, maybe it fell out of his duffel bag when he was walking. You
Or
know,
maybe if there was a boat, it fell out of the boat when he was taking his
exactly.
gear off and
And
washed up
then
onto
ended
the
up
shore
washing up
there.
on shore. I mean, there's plenty of different things I could have done, especially, I don't know. Maybe he did just bury it there and forgot about it. The world may never know. That's the crazy part about this case is it's all up to interpretation after he jumps out of the plane.
Unless there's somebody that comes out of the woodwork and is like, excuse me, I'm dying of like stage 4, 80 by 85 bajillion types of cancer. I just want to let y'all know I'm DB Cooper and I got away with this for my entire freaking life and suck it.
I mean, or no one comes out at all, and it stays a mystery, which honestly I prefer it that way. The more wonder, because that is the one reason why I love true crime, especially older true crime, because you can't like the days of unsolved mysteries are coming to an end because of how good our technology is getting. Obviously, I don't love that this stuff happened, but it is fun to kind of think on, wonder on, and obviously play with your imagination a bit of where did he go? What did he do? You know, who's your daddy and what did he do type shit. So,
Oh, absolutely. My brain keeps getting pulled back to the guy who got laid off, though. Like, bro, you just got laid off and then you bought a house? Like, where'd the money come from? Even if he
I
wasn't
mean,
DB Cooper, maybe he was assisting DB Cooper, and that's where some
very
of the DB
possible.
Cooper money went.
I mean, hey, or maybe he's just got a completely different crime that got overshadowed. He got away with it because it got overshadowed by the DB Cooper
Oh,
case.
that's entirely possible.
But it does also make sense. It gives a motive, it gives the knowledge, and then again, maybe the parachute was just a last minute shot in the dark thing because he knew he was going to get arrested in Reno. Like it is just it's a lot of things to think on, but I honestly believe that we will never quite know. I mean, maybe, like you said, someone comes out of the woodworks and says, hey, I did this, but I mean, so far, didn't two other people admit to it and they get rolled out? I mean, people want to be famous, they want to have their name in the history book. So a lot of people will admit to a lot of stupid shit on their deathbed to try to get there.
I agree with you there, absolutely. And I feel like with the way that the DB Cooper case went down, I feel like if the dude is still alive somewhere, which is probably not likely, but if he is still alive somewhere, he's probably sitting there in silence, reveling in the fact that so many people become consumed by the details of his case. It's been in movies, in documentaries, in books, in media. I mean, heck, they had one of the main characters of the first season of Prison Break was supposed to be DB Cooper.
I mean, yeah, he has definitely become a sensational icon. And again, if it's not, I mean, who knows if he even used his real name? But the real thing about it is, that man had to get a job somewhere because that $200,000, no way it lasted him 50 years. I'm
Not at
telling you
all.
that right now.
I mean, like comparatively speaking, what do we even look at? Like $200,000 inflated to today, and that's even if all of it maintained to today. Even that still wouldn't be enough with what he had left over from trying to live a life in silence. He would have had to get some
Oh,
type of
absolutely.
employment somewhere if he survived the fall.
Well, I mean, maybe he's working at a Dollar General somewhere. Those things are everywhere and they don't do
Wild.
background checks.
Hey, yes, they do. I worked at a Dollar
Oh, they
General. They
do?
definitely
Okay,
do
okay.
background checks now.
Okay, okay.
All right. That being said, now we would really love to hear from you, our listeners. What do you think happened to DB Cooper? Did he survive the daring jump and live out his days with the ransom money, like we were just talking about? Did he perish in the wilderness, leaving behind a mystery that would captivate the nation for decades? Was he an experienced skydiver who planned everything meticulously, or a lucky amateur who took an incredible risk?
And absolutely, we want to hear all your theories, and we also want to hear your opinions on the show itself. Because if you notice these last two episodes, the JFK case, I took the lead on, in this DB Cooper case, Orion took the lead on. If you like one of those styles better, or you want us to go back to the way we were doing it, then just let us know in the comment section. Next one's going to be another together one, but keep those suggestions coming, and we appreciate you for listening.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely appreciate you for listening. We love to hear your theories. We love your comments. We cannot wait for somebody to give us something to add to our list of stuff that we're doing as far as episodes. We have a general idea of what we want to do going forward, but we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants a little bit here. So if you want to hear about a case, definitely let us know. And if you have a particular opinion about the styles in which we're recording, where we are kind of like back and forth, or where one of us takes the lead over the other, please let us know that you want a specific case and the way that you would like to see it done in. And while you're at it, um, keep in mind, we love deep diving into these mysteries. Please suggest cases that have plenty of documentation and evidence we can research. The more detailed the case, the better we can piece together these fascinating stories for you.
I see what you did there by flying by the seat of your pants. Pun intended or no pun intended?
Pun intended.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, but Well, I mean, I think that is the end of this episode,
Yeah, that is all the time we have for this episode. I'm Orion,
and I'm Ducky.
and this has been
Delayed After Dark.